going to be flying, and it is just no doubt in my mind this is all in the idea to raise the inflation expectation, which in turn raises the neutral interest rate, and it makes the economy less restricted. And I know that is complicated for a lot of people to hear, but it is something that I've been trying to share on this channel for a very long time. And that the idea of ever increasing amounts of inflation and inflation expectation actually eases the economy over time. And as we go and we find the credible threats of tariffs, credible threats of war, credible threats of illnesses, credible threats from the banking system, all this stuff ever increases the amount of inflation and inflation expectation. Let me get the dice up here. Alrighty, guys. So I wanted to share with you some links down in the description, and this is one coming out of CNBC. Trump attacks Powell again amid Fed independent fears that jerk will be gone soon, he says. Dun, dun, dun. Now, what I found interesting about it is if you read through this statement, or I'm sorry, this article, this statement was made by Jamie Dimon. It says, anything that chips away at that is probably not a great idea, talking about the independence of the Fed. Sorry, guys. So Jamie Dimon is referring to the independence of the Fed, and chipping away at that would probably not be a good idea. He goes on to say, and in my view, it will have the reverse consequences. It will raise inflation expectations and probably increase rates over time. Now, right there, the idea that it's going to raise the inflation expectations, that's the key to it. It's something that I have been trying to share here for quite some time. And that regardless of anything else that happens out there, if you believe it, if you feel it, if you think it, it will come to reality. Inflation expectations is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So now when I think about what happened today with the Supreme Court decision and the delaying of that decision yet again, right? It was delayed last Friday, supposed to come out here today, got delayed again today till next Friday. And I think to myself, what is going on here? Why don't they just go ahead and release it? And I think, they really have to make sure that this credible threat is well established. See, I look for the articles out there, and this morning and last night, I was looking for articles talking about the Supreme Court decision, and very few of them had much to say. Like, very few articles out there. There was some, but not a lot. And even this morning, as we were leading up to the Supreme Court announcement, there was very few articles getting ramped up thinking, okay, what's the decision going to be for these tariffs? And then the Supreme Court comes out saying, hey, we're postponing the decision. And it was like a nothing. Nobody, like, that's it? You're going to postpone it yet again? And I think, the well-establishing of this credible threat of the Fed's independence has to be delivered. Shut up about the tariffs, deliver the Powell thing. Right? The more that gets pushed, the more the anxiety raises about what it is that's going to happen with the independence, and this is going to create the inflation. How did Jamie Dimon put it? And in his view, it will have the reverse consequences, and it will raise the inflation expectations and probably increase the rates over time. You see how this is working? It works so well. Like when we go back and we think about what it is that the Federal Reserve was looking for prior to COVID in 2020, right? Actually, it was 2018 and earlier than that, but that's okay. We can go back to 2020 because in the speech delivered by Jerome Powell, August 27th of 2020, we learned in that speech, the words of Jerome Powell himself, that they were going to seek, push, find elevated inflation. It was because of the low neutral interest rate. As the COVID pandemic kicked in, as ever-increasing amounts of war, as ever-increasing amounts of fear that the financial collapse were going to take place, the anxiety, fear, uncertainty, and doubt that was pushed out there through the mainstream media has risen the inflation expectation and has risen the neutral interest rate. The economy has become less restricted, and that is very apparent in the incredibly resilient consumer. It's not in the working class. It's in the top 10 to 20% of household incomes. So conducting monetary policy is no longer one of interest rate adjustments in order to raise and lower the unemployment or the employment scenario within the working class. It's now within the consumer. And the fear, uncertainty, and doubt and how that is delivered to the economy will either tighten or ease financial conditions. This is evidence of that. As the tariff threat comes to an end, and I'm sure it will come Friday, whenever the Supreme Court would hurry up and make the decision on it, when that comes to an end, this will be the new credible threat, the Fed's independence. The next one after that will be delivered, will most likely be the continuation of the tariffs through the legitimate legal aspect of it, as opposed to the emergency illegal form. And we're going to find that the credible threats of tariffs are going to, through not only the deployment of the information here on the mainstream media, but not only through the idea that the Federal Reserve is going to be losing its independence, but most likely have another scenario that will be delivered after that as well. To recognize these patterns is to recognize why it is that they are doing it. They are doing it to raise that neutral interest rate. Ever increasing amounts of it. It doesn't, like, I have gone over this information so many times, right? And it's amazing to think, like, you know what really gets me is, like, when I was a kid, I used to look at the government, the media. I guess when I was a kid, I looked at all the grown-ups as having some sort of, like, ability to communicate and be on a super level. Now we have Congressman, who was this? Who said this? Is this John Kennedy, senator, right? If you wanted to design a system to guarantee that interest rates would go up and not down, the best way to do that would to have the Federal Reserve and the executive branch of the United States get in a, quote, pissing contest. This is the words that they use nowadays. Like, how is it that you're supposed to respect the authority, the position, the idea of what it is that they are doing for leadership when this is how they use their words to articulate the descriptions of the current situation we are now in? Pissing contests. Like it's one thing to be the uneducated economist sitting in a suburban talking in such ways, but this is the leadership talking this way. The jerk will be out soon. This is the professionalism that we now have for our leadership. This is the way they communicate and articulate to us. See, I find this interesting because we were joking around the other day about acting professional at work. And then somebody said a few hours later, don't you remember we're supposed to pretend to be professionals here? And I said, not pretend, act. Act professional. How hard is that? All right? We are professionals at what we do, but if you don't act professionally, what do you expect to get as a result? When you have communications that say the jerk will be gone soon, when you have no real understanding, belief, or evidence that that jerk leaving will have any difference to monetary policy, there is zero, right? Except for the voice that communicates on behalf of the FOMC. That'll change, right? And then meanwhile, you got senators describing the situation as a pissing contest. Right? This is what we get nowadays. Actors play pretend for a living, though, right? I want low. Yeah, they can't pretend and they can't act, and that's what's funny about it. It's not only the economy, they use that type of language, and it's all of politics, both parties, as do politicians. Tariffs have been around since the beginning. Let alone the tariffs man countries put on the products and regulations controls keep U.S. products out. All right, John, I'm not like I don't think anybody's really denying the idea of the tariffs and whether or not that they are something that has been used in the past. What I think the idea behind it is that whether or not the tariffs were legal or not, and that portion of it is what everybody focuses in on as far as the legalities or whether or not he should have been able to do it. What I think about is the impact that has on the people's perception, right? So people argue, oh no, it's legal, it's not legal, it's legal, it's not legal. And I'm thinking, what is it that the market thinks about this? Because regardless of the legalities of it, the market is believing and acting and conducting themselves in a particular way on account of that. Right? And now this is the credible threat, because if those tariffs go away, regardless of the legalities of it, the impact has already taken place. That right there, to understand that situation, is the gold machine. That's how it works. The credible threat that of this particular event happening into the future and have it well delivered out there to the people, and the people's reaction to that based on that credible threat, is exactly how the gold machine works. Again, the hypothetical gold machine that Ben Bernanke talked about in 2002 to prevent a deflationary scenario. And that if you can imagine a guy who invents a gold machine that can produce as much gold at will with very little cost or energy, the moment that information gets out to the public, the price of gold would plummet. Even before the guy produces a single ounce of gold or has the machine to do it, just the credible threat alone would be enough. This is what we deal with today. This is our monetary policy. Think about this. If this credible threat of tariff is alleviated, which I believe it will be, and it doesn't matter whether or not it was legal. I mean, that part is really doesn't matter at the point that it's now created the environment that it was meant to do, right? Which was increase the inflation expectations. That is the key to everything. It is the key to the understanding of the monetary policy, because that was the reason that they were failing, is because of the too low of inflation and inflation expectations. John Williams not mentioned it. John Williams had the greatest quote inside of his speech of the most direct delivery I have ever seen. Today we face an altogether different set of consequences stemming from a very low neutral interest rate. All right. Now, understanding that led into, right, today, the problem we need to solve is the risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high. That was delivered to us in 2018 by John Williams. Jerome Powell in 2020, August 27th of 2020, delivered another speech in which that he said straight up that monetary policy with an inflation that was too low posed serious risks to the economy. Inflation too low posed a serious risk to the economy. Today, those problems are being solved. Do you not see it? Like, blaming Jerome Powell is an impossibility. You cannot do it. Like, you can blame him for like testifying to Congress, that part of it, but you cannot blame him for interest rate adjustments. That part is not something that he has control over. To understand why makes more sense than to think that the jerk being gone is going to change anything about monetary policy. Because once you see how the FOMC delivers monetary policy through votes, through many different voting members who alternate through the FOMC, right? These people are now forming monetary policy together. Jerome Powell speaks upon that. To blame him for anything makes no sense whatsoever. It has no logical sense whatsoever. Alrighty, guys. What time is it? 15 minutes into this thing. 2000. Let's see. What am I looking at here? Oh, I got my glasses right there. That would probably make it. Oh, okay. Here we go. Peter says more people have common sense and just see that Trump is just another president, no different than Obama, Biden, Bush. Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I would agree in the sense that I don't really necessarily believe that there is any real agenda outside of the one that has the controlling of the people in a way that doesn't that the inequality doesn't cause them to riot. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. It's just like literally trying to control the people from losing their mind. How much like how much can you feed them? How many jobs can you get them? Like how much subsidies can we like force feed into this thing to keep the ever descending working class individual from losing their mind? Because that's eventually what's going to happen. And if you want to see evidence of it, just look at Iran. But what will eventually happen is that the people, the working class individual, will put 50% of their income towards food. They will lose their mind and they will riot and then overthrow the government. So whatever they can do to prevent that outcome, like UBI contributions or something of that nature, that will be the inevitable outcome. Now, right now, we see the pain that is inflicted upon us. This is going to be for political purposes, for issues that are not. God, I don't want to get into the conspiracy theory of things because that's like it's so easy to slip into it. But this is ultimately what it's going down to, right? Is to push the people into a particular direction and force them to behave in ways. Most of it comes from the idea of what it is that's coming as opposed to what is here. Right? The credible threats. You see it all the time. Even the idea is like we're supposed to get $2,000 checks from all these tariffs. Well, what happens if the tariffs are illegal and the money has to be refunded? Right? There goes your $2,000 check that you were promised? How many people already spent the money? How many people during the Biden administration decided that they were going to stop paying their student loan debt because they thought for sure they were going to be like just removed, like just vanish, just disappear, like I don't know, like somehow that was going to happen. And then only to find that this administration has taken full advantage of all the kids who decided that they weren't going to make their payments anymore and let those interest payments pile up. And now they're going to be forced into paying that back. I mean, you ever think about how it is that one administration just leads into the next administration's power? Like, oh, we would never do that. And of course you wouldn't, but the next administration will, because the powers that you are now creating that you would never take advantage of like that are not for you. They're for the next president to take advantage of. All right. I mean, how many times did you hear about it? We would never fly drones over the United States. We'll never arm drones. We'll never arm drones over the United States. It's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time. When a bailout has a box labeled no viable candidate. Hello, all-nighter. Good to see everybody here. I have to pursue some more excellence, so I shall listen. Right on, Deplorable. It's great to see you up in here, brother. All right, what is the end game for the Fed when it comes to inflation? There is no end game. It's a matter of being able to operate monetary policy. How much time do I have? See, that's what I think a lot of people are asking. Like, what is the finish? What does it look like at the end? There is no end. It's a matter of being able to control the ever-increasing amounts of new money that pours into the system. It's a matter of creating an environment in which that the financial conditions are always available and never frozen. It doesn't mean that you will have a loan that you can get that you would like. It just means that there might be a loan available. Right? Like that's the point of the Federal Reserve. It's no real end to it. It's just making sure that people can borrow money whenever they essentially want to. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a good idea to do it. Now, the Federal Reserve was stuck at the lower bound of zero. That is absolutely critical. To understand, the Federal Reserve would adjust interest rates around 5% in order to stimulate the economy. So if the economy fell into a recession, and that's generally when the working class individuals started losing their job, Right? When the economy fell into a recession, the Federal Reserve would drop interest rates around 5%. That's on the Fed funds level. Now, understanding that the Fed funds rate is essentially the overnight lending rate between the big banks. So it takes time for that lending to actually find its way into the economy or the broader economy in a way that actually impacts the economy. So there's a lag period between the time they cut rates till the time they actually impact the economy in a profound way, 6 months to a year. Now, the Federal Reserve, when they would lower interest rates, people would borrow that money, buy houses, cars, go on vacation. But the key to it was to lower interest rates and get corporations to borrow that money. Because if the corporations borrowed that money, they would generally invest it back into into the company again. And part of that investment back into the company would be hiring people. When you hire people, more people working and more people consuming, and that added consumption then has the reversal to the recessionary pressures, right? So this is how the Federal Reserve would typically operate. Recessionary pressures would kick in. There was something called a neutral employment rate, right? And so whether or not they were below or above that neutral employment rate, if they were below the neutral employment rate, then what you would find is that the inflationary pressures would start to build. If they were above the neutral employment rate and there was not enough people working, then they would find the inflationary pressures would come down. So that neutral employment rate was very important. So there's a Fed funds rate that was neutral, where they positioned the Fed funds rate, and how that resulted in the employment scenario and where the neutral employment rate were. Both of those things were falling very low. Now, the neutral employment rate when it comes to the Fed funds rate, or I'm sorry, the neutral rate when it comes to the Fed funds rate had gotten very close to zero. And the next downturn, there was no room to stimulate the economy. They were stuck at the lower bound of zero. Unemployment had fallen dramatically during this time. Right? Like at first, at the great financial crisis before it took place, there was massive unemployment. The Fed lowered rates to zero, fired up the printing press, screamed zero interest rate policies for the foreseeable future, and the unemployment after it peaked had started to fall, and then it hit historically low levels. From the Obama administration all the way through the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, historically low unemployment, and it did not result with inflation. That scared the hell out of the Federal Reserve. That right there had Jerome Powell, had John Williams, had Lael Brainerd, had all the people at the Federal Reserve losing their mind trying to figure out what it was that they were going to do to create an inflationary scenario, because quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4, which took the Fed's balance sheet of $850 billion to over $4.5 trillion, failed to produce an inflationary scenario. The unemployment rate, the neutral unemployment rate, had fallen very close to zero. They could not get unemployment to fall any further to create an inflationary scenario. Everybody was working. You couldn't throw a stone at a business without hitting a help wanted sign. And the idea that was taking place right there was now, what do we do? Everybody working, everybody consuming, everybody participating in the economy, and we cannot find the inflationary scenario that they were looking for. This is the Federal Reserve's problem, right? Now, what time do I have left? Ah, shit, guys, I'm almost done here. So, here it was, 2018. The Federal Reserve was begging for an inflationary scenario. They had this thing called the makeup strategy, and Lael Brainerd even brought up the idea of a reflationary scenario with a shock to supply chains, and she was talking about that in 2019. So what was delivered? Everything that the Fed ever could possibly have wanted. Elevated inflation expectation, rising neutral interest rate, credible threats of more inflation and inflation expectations coming into the future. And this is all going to ease monetary policy at the Federal Reserve stand still, because elevated inflation and inflation expectations lowers the real interest rates. That raises the neutral interest rate and it makes the economy less restricted. Very few people are going to explain it this way. All right? But this is what's happening. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for the crap that's being done out there to you. think about what it is that the Federal Reserve needed for their monetary policy, how that gold machine, right, because that's what Ben Bernanke described it as, is being delivered through the words. Because remember, it was a gold machine that had no physical form. It was a delivery of information. Remember that. That is how the monetary policy is operating. That's how the Federal Reserve said that they were going to do it, and this is how they're doing it. Philip Jefferson had a great speech communicating about monetary policy. And in that speech, he straight up talked about how it was that they conduct monetary policy. No real talk about interest rate adjustments. Communication about the interest rate adjustments. That's the key to it. Fed independence, man, talk about the credible threat of all credible threats. That one will play out for quite some time, and when that one has run its course, Tariff Plan 2 will be enacted. And it's actually going into motion now. We're going to see it happen, especially after Friday. Hopefully, we'll get that damn Supreme Court decision we've been waiting on to hear. And once that decision has been made, it's going to be full-on independent Federal Reserve questions and debates, and whether or not they're going to be able to hold on to that independence. And then after that run its course, then they'll be back to tariffs again. Uneducated Economist. You guys let me know.